His last wish before execution, to see his dog. But what happened changed everything. The first time Thomas Granger saw Rex again, the hallway smelled like bleach and metal, the kind of sterile, over-clean scent that never masked the rot underneath, just covered it in something colder. It had been 7 years since he last held his dog. And now, shackled to a wheelchair with 2 guards behind him and a ticking clock in front of him, Thomas wondered if Rex would even remember. The steel door groaned open. For a moment, all Thomas saw was the leash, then the black fur, then those amber eyes, not wide or surprised, just watching, like time hadn't moved at all. Rex didn't bark, didn't jump. He walked slowly, ears low, tail still, until he was inches from Thomas's knees. And then, with a motion so small it broke something in Thomas's chest, Rex nosed into the faded red bandana still tied to Thomas's wrist. It was the same one he used to wrap around Rex's paw when he was a pup, pretending it made him a firefighter like his dad. A broken chuckle escaped Thomas. Still playing that game? Huh. His hand trembled as he reached forward. Rex didn't flinch. He just leaned in, pressed his head against Thomas's thigh, and exhaled. The whole room stopped breathing. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, the other looked away. This wasn't just a final visit, it was something sacred. Thomas had been many things in life: a soldier, a firefighter, a brother, and now a man on death row. But here, with Rex, he was just a boy who once saved a tea from a burning basement, a doe who, in turn, saved him more times than anyone knew. Years ago, before the trial, before the headlines, Thomas had pulled a police cane named Kilo out of a collapsing house. Kilo had gone deaf from the blast but lived long enough to sire one last litter. Thomas got the pick of the litter. He named him Rex, raised him like a brother, maybe better. After Thomas returned from his final deployment, where he saw things that no court transcript could capture, it was Rex who lay at the foot of the bed every night while Thomas screamed into the pillow. It was Rex who stood between him and the gun cabinet during the worst of it. And it was Rex, always Rex, who looked at him like he was worth saving even when Thomas stopped believing it himself. Now, in a federal penitentiary in Mississippi, Thomas had asked for just one thing in his final week: to see Rex. The petition had taken months. It was denied twice. Approved once, then rescinded. Finally, with media pressure and a letter from a former commanding officer, they allowed it. A one-time visit, no extensions, no special treatment, no press, and no tears. That last rule was unwritten, but Thomas could feel it in the way the guards avoided eye contact. "You've only got 10 minutes, one said gruffly, but softer than he needed to. Thomas nodded, resting a shaky hand on Rex's fur. "You still pull on the leash?" he asked, voice cracking like a dry leaf. Rex looked up. Then deliberately, he reached for the red bandana and tugged. Just once, like he used to when he wanted Thomas to follow him out into the yard for a run. Thomas laughed through his teeth. "Of course you do." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It never had been. For years, they'd spoken in touches, in gestures, in the kind of shorthand only built between two creatures who'd learned to survive together. Thomas leaned back in the chair. "They say I shouldn't be angry, that I should accept it. But you know me, I never did like rules." Rex blinked slowly. "I didn't kill that man." "Rex," Thomas whispered. "But I didn't stop my brother either." He was shaking, out of control. "I took the blame, because I knew he wouldn't survive prison. I thought I could handle it better." His hand gripped the wheelchair. Maybe I was wrong at that moment. The door opened again. A tall man in a dark green uniform stepped in. His voice was unmistakable. "Even after all these years, you were wrong about one thing, Granger." Thomas looked up in disbelief. "Lieutenant Rollins?" "Yeah," the man walked forward, older now, cane tapping lightly on the cement floor. "But not about taking the blame. You were wrong thinking no one noticed." Rollins glanced at Rex, then at the guards. "You remember Kandahar? That market explosion, you threw your body over me. But it was Rex who pulled me out before the second grenade went off." He looked directly at the guards. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that and for the man who trained him." Thomas tried to speak, but Rollins raised a hand. "I came here because I believe your story, and because this dog deserves more than a silent goodbye." One of the guards radioed something. The other just stared. Rollins took a paper from his jacket and affidavit. You might not walk out of here, but your truth will. That's when it happened. Just as Rollins finished speaking, Rex stood suddenly, ears erect. His body went rigid. Without warning, he lunged toward a man standing near the side wall, a janitor, or so it seemed. But Rex didn't miss. His jaws locked onto the man's wrist, dragging him to the ground. Shouts erupted. Thomas flinched as a pistol skidded across the floor, hidden beneath the man's jacket, followed by a black device with a blinking red light. Within seconds, guards tackled the assailant. Rollins barked commands. Someone yelled code red, and amid the chaos, Rex returned to Thomas's side calm, alert, his tail still. When the dust settled, the truth emerged. The man was part of a fringe extremist group, the same network Thomas had disrupted years ago overseas. The man had planned to assassinate a federal judge in the upcoming hearing. Rex had saved lives again. That night, news broke across every outlet. The death row inmate whose dog prevented a terror attack. The soldier who never stopped serving. Online, the hashtags trended #Rex the hero and #Justice for Thomas. But the sentence stood. The law didn't bend for loyalty, and Thomas never asked it to. The night before the execution, Thomas wrote one final letter and tucked it beneath Rex's bed. It was found by a woman named Ella Hart, the daughter of a girl Thomas saved from a house fire years ago. She had fought to adopt Rex. She opened the note with trembling hands. If I get to come back, it read, I don't want to be a man, or a soldier, or a hero. I want to be the one walking beside him. Because a dork never lies about love. The next morning, as Thomas was led down the hallway, Rex didn't bark, didn't cry. He just sat, watching, eyes locked on his human, the red bandana still tied loosely to his own neck. When the heavy doors closed, Rex didn't turn away, not for a long time, not until the light faded, not until everything was quiet. 3 weeks had passed since the execution, and Ella Hart still couldn't bring herself to delete the footage from her phone. Not the video of Thomas walking away, not the moment the heavy steel door closed behind him, not even the silence that followed. She watched it each night like a ritual, as if somehow, by rewinding enough, she could reverse what had happened. Rex, now curled up at the foot of her bed, didn't move much except to eat or press his head into her lap when her sobs got too hard to swallow. He had become something more than a dog to her. He was a witness, a relic of something too big to explain and too sacred to let go of. But the most unsettling part wasn't the grief. It was the question. That single line from the folded note she found tucked in his collar haunted her every waking moment. But what he protects is still in danger. At first, she dismissed it as poetic metaphor, a dying man's way of clinging to purpose. But then came the email, sent from an encrypted address. Unsigned, just a video file, titled only Rex Proof 1. Ella hesitated, then played it. The grainy footage showed a prison yard taken from a high angle, likely an internal surveillance cam. It was dated 3 days before Thomas's execution. At first, it seemed uneventful. Inmates walking the track, guards drinking coffee. Then, a man approached Thomas, tall, lean, covered in tattoos. The two spoke briefly. Thomas handed him a small, folded slip of paper. The man nodded once and walked away. Ella froze the frame, zoomed in. The tattoo on the man's neck, a pair of wings entwined in barbed wire. She recognized it. It was the same symbol that appeared in police reports about a domestic extremist group operating along the southern border, Sons of Resolution. A group Thomas once testified against under sealed clearance. A chill crept up Ella's spine. What was Thomas still involved in before his death, and what did it have to do with Rex the next day? She called the only person she thought might believe her, Lieutenant James Rollins. It took some convincing to get through to him, but when she finally forwarded the clip, he responded within minutes. That man's name is Blake Cormack, he told her over the phone. Ex-military, suspected bomb maker. We had him on a watch list 5 years ago. Then he vanished. If Thomas met him in prison, he either didn't know who he was, or he did, which scares me more. Rollins agreed to meet. They decided on a quiet location, a church parking lot in rural Alabama. Under the guise of a casual adoption follow-up, when they arrived, Rex bolted from the car and ran straight to Rollins, tail low but wagging. The lieutenant knelt down and ran a hand through Rex's fur, eyes distant. "He hasn't aged a day," he murmured. Ella handed him the note. "This is what Thomas wrote. He said something's still in danger. I think he knew something. And I think Rex does too." Rollins read the note twice, then pulled out his own phone. "There's something I didn't tell anyone after the attack at the hearing." He confessed. When Rex tackled that man with the gun, he didn't just react to the weapon. He growled before the man ever moved, as if he recognized him, as if he remembered. Ella stared. "Are you saying Rex knows who's involved?" Rollins nodded slowly. "I'm saying he might remember faces tied to that network, which means he's a liability or an asset, depending on who finds him first." That night, Ella didn't sleep. She sat beside Rex in the living room, an open file folder on the coffee table filled with printed emails, maps, and everything Rollins had shared with her. Names, places, patterns, each one somehow tying back to Thomas's last weeks in prison, each one pointing to something unfinished, something dangerous. And always, in the corner of every thread, was Rex around 3 a.m. She noticed something strange. Rex was standing at the door, completely still, not barking, just staring. She moved to the window and looked outside. A white pickup truck sat idling across the street, windows tinted, headlights off, no plates. She stepped back, heart hammering. "Rollins," she whispered into her phone a second later. "We're being watched." Within hours, Ella and Rex were relocated to a safe house, a former ranger cabin deep in a wooded reserve, guarded by retired federal officers. Rollins took charge of coordinating security. "We don't know if they're watching you because of Thomas or Rex or both," he said. "But until we know, we keep moving." Days passed, then a week, then another. But Rex changed. He grew restless, whined at the door every night. One evening, he ran in circles near the fireplace until Ella finally followed him. He led her to the storage cellar beneath the cabin. There, hidden under a loose floorboard, she found an old fireproof box. Inside, a series of photos, a folded map marked with red circles, and a USB drive labeled Embers. The map showed coordinates remote sites across the southern U.S., all tied to a series of unexplained power station failures. The photos showed men with the same tattoo wings and barbed wire, and the drive contained video logs of Thomas, recorded in secret. Ella clicked play. On screen, Thomas sat in what looked like the prison library. "If you're watching this," he began, "then either I'm dead or Rex showed you what I couldn't." He paused, voice cracking. "There's a network embedded in everything, prisons, security firms, even parts of the military. I tried to warn people, but they buried it, buried me. And the only one I trust to keep the trail alive is Rex." He looked off camera, then back. He remembers faces, smells, commands. He's more than a dog. He's the last witness. And if they come for him, you run. Ella shut the laptop with shaking hands. She turned to Rex, who was sitting at attention, eyes locked on her as if waiting for orders, or maybe offering them. For the first time, she saw him not just as a companion, but as a keeper of truth, of memory, of war, and now, maybe, of justice. The next morning, she didn't call Rollins, she didn't pack, she just clipped the leash to Rex's collar, grabbed the USB drive, and whispered, "Okay, partner, show me," and together, they stepped into the woods, not to hide, but to begin. The forest that surrounded the safe house had once been part of a decommissioned ranger outpost, with barely visible paths cutting through pines that seemed to breathe with memory. Ella followed Rex with cautious steps, her boots crunching softly over needles and frostbitten leaves. The sun hadn't yet broken the tree line, casting everything in cold shades of blue and gray. But Rex moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to sniff the ground or glance back to make sure she was still behind him. Ella held the USB drive tight in her coat pocket, the plastic still warm from where she'd clutched it all night. She had no idea where Rex was leading her, only that it wasn't random. After 20 minutes, they reached a rusted chain-link fence, long since collapsed in places. Beyond it, an overgrown structure emerged, nearly invisible beneath moss and vine. A concrete bunker. She stepped forward, brushing away ivy, and found a sealed metal hatch with a keypad long dead. Rex scratched at the corner of the door, then sat down, staring at her. Ella kneeled, her breath hitching. This was one of the sites, wasn't it? She checked the map again, the red circle marked just a few hundred yards off their current location. Whatever this place was, Thomas had known about it, using her multi-tool. She pried the lock plate open. The hatch groaned. Rust flakes drifted down like old snow as the door slowly gave way. The air that escaped was stale, electric with dust and silence. They descended. Inside, the bunker's walls were lined with broken monitors and files still locked in cabinets. A faint hum came from a generator unit flickering on its last breath. Rex led her to the back, to a door that had been jammed shut with an iron rod. She removed it and stepped into what looked like a communication center, busted antennas, a wall map with lines and pins, and on the center table another device marked Embers.2. She slid the USB into her laptop. The file opened with Thomas's face again, this time gaunter, older if you're watching this. You found the second station. Good. That means Rex remembered, which means you're the right person to finish this. He inhaled, long and shaky. The network isn't just extremist, it's business, arms, intel, fabricated threats. The goal isn't chaos, it's control. They recruit from within systems people trust: soldiers, correctional officers, even rescue teams. That's why it worked, because no one suspects the helpers. He rubbed his face. They offered me silence in exchange for freedom. I refused, and I knew they'd bury me. So I gave everything I couldn't say to Rex. Ella stared at the screen as it cut to black. Her pulse thundered. It was too big, too dangerous, too impossible. But Rex stood still, unmoving, as if daring her to keep doubting. She searched the rest of the bunker and found a small safe under the desk. Inside were classified documents, some labeled with military insignia, some without. Coordinates, call signs, photographs of men in uniform standing beside crates of weapons marked for humanitarian delivery. It was damning. Ella packed everything into her bag and turned to leave, but Rex growled, not at her, at the door. Footsteps echoed from above. Not one pair, multiple. She scrambled to shut the laptop, grab her gear, and extinguish any light. Then she slipped behind a cabinet. Rex pressed tightly against her. Voices filtered down. Signal came from here. Someone accessed it. Orders: recover the drive, eliminate the rest. Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to run, to cry. But Rex remained calm, his breathing even. Ears trained forward like radar. When one of the men stepped into the comms room, Rex tensed but didn't move. The man swept a flashlight across the equipment. Empty. Then sweep again. The light flicked off. The boots receded. She waited until the sound of a hatch creaking open signaled their exit. Then silence. Rex nudged her hand. They moved. Through the back hallway. Out an emergency hatch barely wide enough to squeeze through. They emerged behind the hill, a mile from the fence. She didn't stop until they were back near the cabin. But something was wrong. Smoke, thin and rising. Ella ran faster, panic crashing over her in waves. The safe house was in flames, the guards gone. The SUV missing, a note pinned to the gatepost. Scrawled in ink, "You were warned." She felt her knees give out. Rex pressed against her side, not trembling, waiting. They knew we'd go looking. She whispered. This was bait. She wanted to crumble. But then she looked at Rex, still watching, still ready. "We need help," she said aloud, standing shakily. "Someone they won't suspect, someone who owes you." 2 days later, they arrived in Tennessee, at the home of Charles Kane, a retired journalist once saved by Thomas during a motel fire. Kane had gone off-grid after a whistleblower piece cost him everything. But Ella found him anyway. When he opened the door, saw Rex, and heard Ella say Thomas's name, he let them in without question. Over the next 4 days, Kane helped duplicate the files, encrypt the videos, and trace the coordinates. The final piece was hidden in an old wildfire rescue report, a location Thomas had once deployed to. Suspiciously unmarked in the official maps. Another red circle. This one in Arizona. That's the source, Kane said. Where the ops start. Where they clean the trails. Ella packed the bag. Then that's where it ends. The next morning, with Kane's help, they set off west, Rex in the passenger seat, Ella at the wheel, the map in her lap, Thomas's voice in her head. He's the last witness, it had said. But Ella now knew better. They both were. And neither of them was going to stop. The desert didn't welcome strangers, it watched them. As Ella drove deeper into Arizona, the highway fell away behind them like a lifeline being cut strand by strand. Endless miles of rust-colored dust and jagged cliffs stretched ahead, broken only by the occasional tumbleweed or bleached road sign riddled with bullet holes. Rex sat beside her in silence, his posture alert, as if he knew the place they were going was more than just a dot on the map. It was where everything began. The final red circle on Thomas's encrypted diagram had led them here, an abandoned outpost listed in no official database, registered under a shell company folded decades ago. As they approached the final coordinates, Ella pulled off the main road onto a gravel path hidden behind brush and broken fencing. A few miles in, a weather-worn gate came into view, tall, rusted, and chained with a new padlock. But the lock had already been cut. Recently, she stepped out, scanning the terrain, no cameras, no movement. Only the distant cry of a hawk and the creak of dry wind through cactus arms. With her heart hammering, she opened the gate and drove in slowly, the tires crunching over rocks like brittle bones. The compound looked like something out of a war zone simulation, two large warehouse buildings, a small watchtower, and what appeared to be a communications dome, now collapsed inward like a skull with a caved cranium. She parked behind a slope, out of sight, and turned to Rex. "You ready?" He blinked once, then jumped down, nose immediately to the air. Together they approached the first warehouse. The air smelled like oil, metal, and old heat. Ella found a side entrance partially unlatched. Inside, rows of empty crates and faded labels filled the space, some marked medical aid. Others, disaster relief, but the dates didn't add up. Some were from years that never had corresponding crises, a lie in every sticker. At the far end was a stairwell leading underground. A chill traveled up her spine. She looked at Rex, and he stepped forward first. The corridor below was narrow and windowless, lit only by emergency strips barely glowing. She passed doors with strange numbers, a few ajar, revealing empty office spaces except for one. Inside, a whiteboard filled with names and check marks. Underhandled were rows of initials, underpinning one name, Thomas Granger. Ella stared at it, her fingers trembling. They hadn't just imprisoned him. He had been a target, someone they couldn't silence outright, so they waited, buried him in bureaucracy and shadows until no one would care, until he volunteered for the silence himself. A sudden noise, footsteps, maybe breathing, echoed behind them. She snapped off the flashlight. Rex crouched low, tail rigid, ears forward. A man in black fatigues passed the hallway, not seeing them. Then another. Security, not from any agency she knew. "We need proof," she whispered. "We need to finish what Thomas started." At the end of the hallway was a vault-like door, electronic, but the panel next to it blinked. USB port. She slid in the drive marked embers or two. The panel buzzed, then clicked. The door opened. Inside, a command room still operational. Screens displayed active communications, surveillance feeds from unlisted locations, and shipping manifests routed through third-party NGOs. Weapons, intel, personnel movements. It wasn't just a rogue group, it was infrastructure deep, resilient, and global. And in the center of it all, on one monitor, a file marked Project Emberline. She opened it, a roster of field operatives, blackmail dossiers, and a directive marked Initiate Cleanup Granger Protocol. Her stomach turned. It was a hit list disguised as procedure. Before she could copy the files, an alarm blared, soft at first, then rising into a bone-cutting shriek. Motion detectors. Too much time. Rex growled, low and steady. Let's move, she hissed, grabbing the drive and turning toward the hall just as boots thundered from both directions. She ducked into a side room, clutching the bag as Rex leapt ahead, knocking over metal cabinets to block the door. But the men were already outside, shouting. Female target confirmed, accompanied by canine orders, contain and recover the drive. A single tear slid down Ella's cheek, not from fear, but fury. They had erased lives like Thomas's, silenced truth with process, and now they wanted to do it again. She found a vent at the back of the room, narrow, sharp, but just wide enough. She shoved the drive into Rex's collar and whispered, "Run. Find Kane. Find someone who'll listen." Rex didn't move. She shouted now, voice cracked, "Go." When he finally did, it was with a last look that nearly shattered her heart. Then he vanished into the vent. The door burst open seconds later. Ella didn't scream, didn't plead. She raised her hands and stared at them, all 6 men in faceless armor. Guns trained, hands sure, they dragged her out. The screen behind her still flashed red, unauthorized access. Data breach. 2 states away. Charles Kane sat at a coffee shop, scrolling through old articles on a cracked tablet when a low bark startled him. He looked down. Rex, covered in scratches, panting hard, with a red drive tied to his collar. Kane reached for it, heart pounding. What the hell? Boy! He plugged it into his laptop, and the screen lit up with files. Then a video, Bella's voice. "If you're watching this, I've been compromised. Don't trust anyone. Send this to every channel. Every journalist. This can't disappear like Thomas." Kane swallowed, his eyes watering. "You brave little..." A loud bang outside cut him off. A black SUV, men in tactical gear. They'd tracked the signal. "No time," Kane muttered. He yanked the drive, tucked it into a pre-addressed package in his coat, and sprinted for the back exit. Rex hot on his heels. We send it first, then we run. The chase had begun. But so had the reckoning. Somewhere in a concrete room, Ella sat cuffed, bruised but defiant. When the man across from her asked, "Was it worth it?" she smiled through bloodied lips. "You'll know when the world finds out." The broadcast went live at 3:07 a.m., a time when most of the world was asleep and the ones awake were either too tired to care or too wired to ignore what was coming. The video began with no logos, no anchor, just a woman's voice over a black screen, Ella's voice. "My name is Ella Rodriguez. I am a former investigative journalist. If you are hearing this, I may no longer be alive, but the story I'm about to share has already cost lives, and if nothing is done, it will claim more." The screen faded into footage, classified documents, names, maps, faces of people who had disappeared, court evidence tampered with, encrypted messages decrypted, and at the center of it all, Project Emberline, a covert operation designed to silence dissenters within military and federal systems, targeting those who stood between the machinery and its secrets. Thomas Granger was not the first, and Ella would not be the last. The broadcast looped every hour, duplicated and uploaded to over 100 mirror sites, newsrooms, and forums by a network of independent coders. Within a day, it had 27 million views. By the end of the week, congressional hearings were announced. Kane was never caught. He disappeared into the wilderness with Rex, showing up only through dead drops, encrypted emails, and occasional public leaks that kept the fire burning. He never used his real name again, but everyone knew the man with the dog. Rex became a symbol not just of loyalty, but of resistance. Photos of him in a gray bandana circulated everywhere, Rex staring into a valley at sunrise, Rex walking next to protesters in D.C., Rex standing by a makeshift grave with only a cross-marked truth. No one knew who took those pictures, but they always appeared when hope began to fade. Somewhere deep in a national archive, a case file once labeled Thomas Granger convicted was quietly reclassified as Thomas Granger, posthumous inquiry pending. And in a locked drawer of evidence storage, the red scarf Rex had pulled from Thomas's hand the day they last saw each other remained untouched, folded with reverence. Time passed, as it always does. Names faded from headlines, new scandals rose. But in the corners of classrooms, on quiet porches, inside coffee shops, People still whispered the story. Some said Thomas had been a hero. Others said he'd simply been a man broken by war, saved by a dog who refused to let go. Both versions were true. 10 years later, a woman walked into a dusty bookstore in Santa Fe. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, but her eyes held a weight that silenced the room. She handed the clerk an envelope and said, "Mail this if anything happens to me." The clerk nodded. He'd seen people like her before, people who knew too much and smiled too little. Outside, a golden shepherd rested beside a rusting pickup, his muzzle gray, but his eyes sharp. Rex. He was older now, his steps slower, his coat thinner but still alert, still watching. They said dogs don't remember like humans do, that they live in the now. But Rex remembered. Every scent, every step beside Thomas, every door that closed behind him. And now, with Ella, he had found a new purpose. She ran an underground network, now safe houses, encrypted drives, whistleblower routes. She called it the Red Thread, in honor of the scarf, of the bond, of the promises made between people and their protectors. One evening, Ella received a package with no return address. Inside was a photo. Thomas, in his younger days, standing beside Rex as a pup, both looking off camera with the same intensity. On the back was a note: "They can silence a voice, but never the echo." That night, she climbed a hill with Rex beside her and sat under the stars. "Do you think he'd be proud of us?" she asked. Rex licked her hand once, then lay down. A gust of wind swept past, warm and strange, and for a moment, she swore she heard a voice whisper from the dark, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep going." Weeks later, a documentary aired titled "The Last Wish: A Dog's Loyalty Beyond Death." It ended with a final image: Rex standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind blowing through his fur, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun met the dust. Narration played softly. "There are things in this world stronger than truth, louder than guns, faster than justice. One of them is love, and one of them, if you're lucky, has 4 legs, a beating heart, and never leaves your side. Even when you do." Rex passed away in his sleep the following spring. Under an olive tree beside Ella's cabin, she buried him wrapped in Thomas's old firefighter coat, the red scarf around his neck. On his headstone, she etched only 3 words he stayed anyway. In the years to come, children would read his story in textbooks, his statue erected in quiet parks, and his name whispered by those walking alone through fire, real or otherwise. Because some heroes don't wear badges, some never speak a word, some just wait by the door until the very end.